Hi, Matt Landsman here, Landsman Law. I wanted to give an overview of sex crimes in Florida, and that means their ranges of possible penalties, their potential definitions, uh, common factual scenarios, issues which may come up, and concerns that you may run into. So let me get started and first talk about the potential range of possible types of charges which in Florida may be considered a sex crime. So the first thing to know about sex crimes in Florida is that there's a huge range of charges which are going to be considered sex crimes, even if they don't require registration as a sex offender. If you're convicted of them, many of them are considered in that category. So from on the low end, you can have something as small as indecent exposure or a prostitution charge. Some people will consider those sexual crimes in Florida. However, they may not require registration, but they're going to be of a sexual nature. But you can go beyond that, and you're going to run into more traditional sex crimes like lewd and lascivious molestation, lewd and lascivious conduct. They all kind of begin with lewd and lascivious as the definition of the crime. They're going to go range increasingly harsh penalties and allegations as you go from indecent exposure, prostitution, up to lewd and lascivious offenses, uh, possession of certain illegal materials involving minors, failure to register as a sexual offender, and to the almost the highest end is different types of sexual battery charges. And in Florida, there's a similarity between lewd and lascivious molestation or lewd and lascivious conduct or lewd and lascivious exhibition charges and sexual battery charges in that they're broken down into particular acts committed in the allegations. And the allegations can get worse based on the age of the victim or the alleged victim and how the act is conducted. For example, in sexual battery charges, the normal penalty, if you're assuming there is no enhancing circumstances, two adults with some sort of unconsensual sexual uh, situation is going to be considered sexual battery, and that's generally a second degree felony, punishable of up to 15 years in prison and $10,000 fine. However, with a weapon, it increases the penalty for the offense, or if there's special circumstances in the specific allegations of the case, that can increase the maximum possible penalty as well. So you're going to go from a second degree felony up to a first degree felony or a first degree penalty punishable by life. Or in some circumstances, there's different types of charges for this, which would be life felonies and the same kind of goes for the lewd and lascivious molestation charges, where it has to do with the age of the offenders and what exactly occurred. So those are all the different types of sexual offenses just generally. The penalties are going to range from the lowest end concept is going to be a first degree misdemeanor, usually meaning it can be up to a year in the county jail or up to $1,000 fine. But some of the most serious sexual offenses are going to range all the way up to a potential life sentence. And that can be a life sentence with like a 25-year minimum mandatory sentence, depending on the specific types of sex crime. And or they could be up to for example, up to a first degree felony, up to 30 years. Uh, so that's kind of like the range is that great. It can be first degree misdemeanor up to almost any kind of felony. That means first, second, or third, or a first punishable by life. So those are the different kind of tiers of offenses, and what they're roughly going to encompass is going to be almost any sexual conduct with a person underage is going to be a felony, and usually it's going to jump up to a second or first degree felony very quickly. And under the primary highest possible penalties are going to be reserved for offenses involving a child under 12. As far as sexual battery offenses go, the primary offense is going to be a sexual battery, which is going to be a second degree felony with no enhanced circumstances. And I'll talk about that in a second. And that's up to 15 years in prison and or $10,000 fine. So I know there's this giant range of potential sex crimes to discuss, but this is just an overview. So first of all, those are the huge range of the potential types of charges you could be facing. But also however, there are certain issues which you're going to run into that are going to be common to many of them. And I'm just going to briefly give you an overview of what those could be and why it's important to have an attorney who knows what they're doing for dealing with any of them. For example, consent is a common concern for most of those kinds of charges. And consent is something that's heavily contested in many cases. However, it's only going to be applicable to certain sexual offenses. If the alleged victim is under 18, if that is part of the allegations, consent is generally not going to be a defense. However, it could be relevant to the proceedings in some way. But there's other things that are going to be common to these kinds of offenses that you're going to want to have an expert attorney knowing about before they even can give you good advice about it. That has to do with things like DNA. The existence of DNA or the absence of DNA could be crucial to your case, and you want to make sure you have somebody who is going to be knowledgeable about these things, and whether or not there is and or the absence of such and where could be crucial to decisions about the entire thing. Other things which are going to be common to cases like this are going to be search and seizure issues. Can be very common, having to do with seizure of computer systems, hard drives, cloud drives, physical drives, laptops, cell phones, things like that, and also search warrants are going to be frequently relevant in terms of possession of illegal items and how they acquired those search warrants and how they are executed. Those topics are kind of common to many sexual offenses, and not that many people have a lot of experience with those things. So you're going to want to make sure that your attorney has expertise in those subject matters to even be able to discuss it intelligently. There's going to be additional issues with that. For example, that you're going to run into issues having to do with police practices and how they basically conduct their investigations, and having somebody who's familiar with that and how to challenge them, or what exactly even occurred before you can, or what is going to occur before you can figure out what kind of possible defenses you have and how strong or weak your case is. Other than that, so all those kinds of issues are going to be common to each of the kind of sexual offenses you may run into. And you're also going to have issues with some of the most basic questions that you may have. You're going to need somebody who knows what is going to be asked of you and what the effects could be. And so, for example, the smallest question in your mind may be one of the result in some of the biggest consequences. For example, should I talk to a detective? That is not an easy question. You want to have expert counsel for figuring out what I should do. And questions like that come up very early in many sex offense cases, and you're going to need somebody to help you immediately. Whether or not you give a statement and why, and what happens, are you having somebody help you figure out your answer to those questions? And for people who have not done anything wrong, the decision of whether or not to speak to a detective can still be crucial. Just because people think, well, I haven't done anything, so I should go in there and speak to a detective, they need to think again and have an experienced defense attorney talk them through it. You retain somebody and make sure you understand what are the benefits and the risks of me speaking to this person, even if I did nothing wrong, and what that's going to mean later on. Like, is there any value to this, and what's going to happen? So you need to take this, if you've been accused of anything like this, you need to take it super seriously. You need to get an expert attorney immediately. And if you have any questions, contact me, Matt Landsman, Landsman Law, for you.